the new God of prayer, the new gods of prayer, the new God of prayer, the new goddess of prayer, the new goddesses of prayer, the new goddess of prayer, the old God of prayer, the old gods of prayer, the old God of prayer, the old goddess of prayer, the old goddesses of prayer, the old goddess of prayer, the greater God of prayer, the greater gods of prayer, the greater God of prayer, the greater goddess of prayer, the greater goddesses of prayer, the greater goddess of prayer, the lesser God of prayer, the lesser gods of prayer, the lesser God of prayer, the lesser goddess of prayer, the lesser goddesses of prayer, the lesser goddess of prayer, the higher God of prayer, the higher gods of prayer, the higher God of prayer, the higher goddess of prayer, the higher goddesses of prayer, the higher goddess of prayer, the lower God of prayer, the lower gods of prayer, the lower God of prayer, the lower goddess of prayer, the lower goddesses of prayer, the lower goddess of prayer, the greater spirit of prayer, the greater spirits of prayer, the greater spirit of prayer, the lesser spirit of prayer, the lesser spirits of prayer, the lesser spirit of prayer, the higher spirit of prayer, the higher spirits of prayer, the higher spirit of prayer, the lower spirit of prayer, the lower spirits of prayer, the lower spirit of prayer, the major God of prayer, the major gods of prayer, the major God of prayer, the major goddess of prayer, the major goddesses of prayer, the major goddess of prayer, the minor God of prayer, the minor gods of prayer, the minor God of prayer, the minor goddess of prayer, the minor goddesses of prayer, the minor goddess of prayer, the superior God of prayer, the superior gods of prayer, the superior God of prayer, the superior goddess of prayer, the superior goddesses of prayer, the superior goddess of prayer, the inferior God of prayer, the inferior gods of prayer, the inferior God of prayer, the inferior goddess of prayer, the inferior goddesses of prayer, the inferior goddess of prayer, the ancestor God of prayer, the ancestor gods of prayer, the ancestor God of prayer, the ancestor goddess of prayer, the ancestor goddesses of prayer, the ancestor goddess of prayer, the ascendant God of prayer, the ascendant gods of prayer, the ascendant God of prayer, the ascendant goddess of prayer, the ascendant goddesses of prayer, the ascendant goddess of prayer, the descendant God of prayer, the descendant gods of prayer, the descendant God of prayer, the descendant goddess of prayer, the descendant goddesses of prayer, the descendant goddess of prayer, the transcendent God of prayer, the transcendent gods of prayer, the transcendent God of prayer, the transcendent goddess of prayer, the transcendent goddesses of prayer, the transcendent goddess of prayer, the past God of prayer, the past gods of prayer, the past God of prayer, the past goddess of prayer, the past goddesses of prayer, the past goddess of prayer, the present God of prayer, the present gods of prayer, the present God of prayer, the present goddess of prayer, the present goddesses of prayer, the present goddess of prayer, the future God of prayer, the future gods of prayer, the future God of prayer, the future goddess of prayer, the future goddesses of prayer, the future goddess of prayer, the authentic God of prayer, the authentic gods of prayer, the authentic God of prayer, the authentic goddess of prayer, the authentic goddesses of prayer, the authentic goddess of prayer, the synthetic God of prayer, the synthetic gods of prayer, the synthetic God of prayer, the synthetic goddess of prayer, the synthetic goddesses of prayer, the synthetic goddess of prayer, the progressive God of prayer, the progressive gods of prayer, the progressive God of prayer, the progressive goddess of prayer, the progressive goddesses of prayer, the progressive goddess of prayer, the regressive God of prayer, the regressive gods of prayer, the regressive God of prayer, the regressive goddess of prayer, the regressive goddesses of prayer, the regressive goddess of prayer, the ordinary God of prayer, the ordinary gods of prayer, the ordinary God of prayer, the ordinary goddess of prayer, the ordinary goddesses of prayer, the ordinary goddess of prayer, the extraordinary God of prayer, the extraordinary gods of prayer, the extraordinary God of prayer, the extraordinary goddess of prayer, the extraordinary goddesses of prayer, the extraordinary goddess of prayer, the static God of prayer, the static gods of prayer, the static God of prayer, the static goddess of prayer, the static goddesses of prayer, the static goddess of prayer, the dynamic God of prayer, the dynamic gods of prayer, the dynamic God of prayer, the dynamic goddess of prayer, the dynamic goddesses of prayer, the dynamic goddess of prayer, the land God of prayer, the land gods of prayer, the land God of prayer, the land goddess of prayer, the land goddesses of prayer, the land goddess of prayer, the sea God of prayer, the sea gods of prayer, the sea God of prayer, the sea goddess of prayer, the sea goddesses of prayer, the sea goddess of prayer, the sky God of prayer, the sky gods of prayer, the sky God of prayer, the sky goddess of prayer, the sky goddesses of prayer, the sky goddess of prayer, the God of prayer, the gods of prayer, the God of prayer, the goddess of prayer, the goddesses of prayer, the goddess of prayer, the half God of prayer, the half gods of prayer, the half God of prayer, the half goddess of prayer, the half goddesses of prayer, the half goddess of prayer, the vessel of prayer, the vessels of prayer, the vessel of prayer, the name of prayer, the names of prayer, the name of prayer, the person of prayer, the persons of prayer, the person of prayer, the persona of prayer, the personas of prayer, the persona of prayer, the personage of prayer, the personages of prayer, the personage of prayer, the personality of prayer, the personalities of prayer, the personality of prayer, the personification of prayer, the personifications of prayer, the personification of prayer, the image of prayer, the images of prayer, the image of prayer, the imagination of prayer, the imaginations of prayer, the imagination of prayer, the belief of prayer, the beliefs of prayer, the belief of prayer, the thought of prayer, the thoughts of prayer, the thought of prayer, the word of prayer, the words of prayer, the word of prayer, the action of prayer, the actions of prayer, the action of prayer, the reaction of prayer, the reactions of prayer, the reaction of prayer, the feeling of prayer, the feelings of prayer, the feeling of prayer, the situation of prayer, the situations of prayer, the situation of prayer, the circumstance of prayer, the circumstances of prayer, the circumstance of prayer, the environment of prayer, the environments of prayer, the environment of prayer, the relationship of prayer, the relationships of prayer, the relationship of prayer, the number of prayer, the numbers of prayer, the number of prayer, the formula of prayer, the formulas of prayer, the formula of prayer, the equation of prayer, the equations of prayer, the equation of prayer, the theory of prayer, the theories of prayer, the theory of prayer, the symbol of prayer, the symbols of prayer, the symbol of prayer, the color of prayer, the colors of prayer, the color of prayer, the thing of prayer, the things of prayer, the thing of prayer, the way of prayer, the ways of prayer, the way of prayer, the place of prayer, the places of prayer, the place of prayer, the time of prayer, the times of prayer, the time of prayer, the event of prayer, the events of prayer, the event of prayer, the result of prayer, the results of prayer, the result of prayer, the crown of prayer, the crowns of prayer, the crown of prayer, the throne of prayer, the thrones of prayer, the throne of prayer, the prayer king, the prayer kings, the prayer kingdom, the prayer kingdoms, The Prayer King subject. The Prayer King subjects. The Prayer King's dominion. The Prayer King's dominions, the kingdom of prayer. The kingdoms of prayer. The kingdom of prayer, the Prayer Queen. The Prayer Queens. The Prayer Queendom. The Prayer Queendoms. The Prayer Queen subject. The Prayer Queen subjects. The Prayer Queen's dominion. The Prayer Queen's dominions, the queendom of prayer. The queendoms of prayer. The queendom of prayer, the Prayer Prince. The Prayer Princes. The Prayer Princedom. The Prayer Princedoms. The Prayer Prince's subject. The Prayer Prince's subjects. The Prayer Prince's dominion. The Prayer Prince's dominions, the princedom of prayer. The princedoms of prayer. The princedom of prayer, the Prayer Princess. The Prayer Princesses. The Prayer Princessdom. The Prayer Princessdoms. The Prayer Princess's subject. The Prayer Princess's subjects. The Prayer Princess's dominion. The Prayer Princess's dominions, the princessdom of prayer. The princessdoms of prayer. The princessdom of prayer, the Lord of prayer. The lords of prayer. The Lord of prayer, the Lordess of prayer. The lordesses of prayer. The lordess of prayer, the priest of prayer. The priests of prayer. The priest of prayer, the priestess of prayer. The priestesses of prayer. The priestess of prayer, the ritual of prayer. The rituals of prayer. The ritual of prayer, the shrine of prayer. The shrines of prayer. The shrine of prayer, the temple of prayer. The temples of prayer. The temple of prayer, the leader of prayer. The leaders of prayer. The leader of prayer, the follower of prayer. The followers of prayer. The follower of prayer, the natural substance of prayer. The natural substances of prayer. The natural substance of prayer, the supernatural substance of prayer. The supernatural substances of prayer. The supernatural substance of prayer, the temporal substance of prayer. The temporal substances of prayer. The temporal substance of prayer, the spiritual substance of prayer. The spiritual substances of prayer. The spiritual substance of prayer, the natural form of prayer. The natural forms of prayer. The natural form of prayer, the supernatural form of prayer. The supernatural forms of prayer. The supernatural form of prayer, the temporal form of prayer. The temporal forms of prayer. The temporal form of prayer, the spiritual form of prayer. The spiritual forms of prayer. The spiritual form of prayer, the age of prayer. The ages of prayer. The age of prayer, the era of prayer. The eras of prayer. The era of prayer, the awakener of prayer. The awakeners of prayer. The awakener of prayer, the awakening of prayer. The awakenings of prayer. The awakening of prayer, the realm of prayer. The realms of prayer. The realm of prayer, the dimension of prayer. The dimensions of prayer. The dimension of prayer, the zone of prayer. The zones of prayer. The zone of prayer, the frequency of prayer. The frequencies of prayer. The frequency of prayer, the century of prayer. The centuries of prayer. The century of prayer, the millennium of prayer. The millenniums of prayer. The millennium of prayer, the purpose of prayer. The purposes of prayer. The purpose of prayer, the meaning of prayer. The meanings of prayer. The meaning of prayer, the culture of prayer. The cultures of prayer. The culture of prayer, the demonstrator of prayer. The demonstrators of prayer. The demonstrator of prayer, the demonstration of prayer. The demonstrations of prayer. The demonstration of prayer, the manifester of prayer. The manifestors of prayer. The manifester of prayer, the manifestation of prayer. The manifestations of prayer. The manifestation of prayer, the presence of prayer. The presences of prayer. The presence of prayer, the glow of prayer. The glows of prayer. The glow of prayer, the goal of prayer. The goals of prayer. the goal of prayer, the plan of prayer, the plans of prayer, the plan of prayer, the book of prayer, the books of prayer, the book of prayer, the philosopher of prayer, the philosophers of prayer, the philosopher of prayer, the philosophy of prayer, the philosophies of prayer, the philosophy of prayer, the releaser of prayer, the releasers of prayer, the releaser of prayer, the release of prayer, the releases of prayer, the release of prayer, the variable of prayer, the variables of prayer, the variable of prayer, the cause of prayer, the causes of prayer, the cause of prayer, the effect of prayer, the effects of prayer, the effect of prayer, the journey of prayer, the journeys of prayer, the journey of prayer, the emergence of prayer, the emergences of prayer, the emergence of prayer, the source of prayer, the sources of prayer, the source of prayer, the originator of prayer, the originators of prayer, the originator of prayer, the origin of prayer, the origins of prayer, the origin of prayer, the forefather of prayer, the forefathers of prayer, the forefather of prayer, the foremother of prayer, the foremothers of prayer, the foremother of prayer, the ancestor of prayer, the ancestors of prayer, the ancestor of prayer, the descendant of prayer, the descendants of prayer, the descendant of prayer, the lineage of prayer, the lineages of prayer, the lineage of prayer, the heritage of prayer, the heritages of prayer, the heritage of prayer, the heir of prayer, the heirs of prayer, the heir of prayer, the co-heir of prayer, the co-heirs of prayer, the co-heir of prayer, the joint heir of prayer, the joint heirs of prayer, the joint heir of prayer, the dynasty of prayer, the dynasties of prayer, the dynasty of prayer, the force of prayer, the forces of prayer, the force of prayer, the law of prayer, the laws of prayer, the law of prayer, the pact of prayer, the pacts of prayer, the pact of prayer, the game of prayer, the games of prayer, the game of prayer, the mask of prayer, the masks of prayer, the mask of prayer, the armor of prayer, the armors of prayer, the armor of prayer, the sword of prayer, the swords of prayer, the sword of prayer, the shield of prayer, the shields of prayer, the shield of prayer, the force shield of prayer, the force shields of prayer, the force shield of prayer, the armored force shield of prayer, the armored force shields of prayer, the armored force shield of prayer, the champion of prayer, the champions of prayer, the champion of prayer, the guardian of prayer, the guardians of prayer, the guardian of prayer, the defender of prayer, the defenders of prayer, the defender of prayer, the protector of prayer, the protectors of prayer, the protector of prayer, the chant of prayer, the chants of prayer, the chant of prayer, the shape of prayer, the shapes of prayer, the shape of prayer, the cube of prayer, the cubes of prayer, the cube of prayer, the cuboid of prayer, the cuboids of prayer, the cuboid of prayer, the sphere of prayer, the spheres of prayer, the sphere of prayer, the spheroid of prayer, the spheroids of prayer, the spheroid of prayer, the prism of prayer, the prisms of prayer, the prism of prayer, the pyramid of prayer, the pyramids of prayer, the pyramid of prayer, the cylinder of prayer, the cylinders of prayer, the cylinder of prayer, the cone of prayer, the cones of prayer, the cone of prayer, the triangle of prayer, the triangles of prayer, the triangle of prayer, the circle of prayer, the circles of prayer, the circle of prayer, the semicircle of prayer, the semicircles of prayer, the semicircle of prayer, the square of prayer, the squares of prayer, the square of prayer, the rectangle of prayer, the rectangles of prayer, the rectangle of prayer, the parallelogram of prayer, the parallelograms of prayer, the parallelogram of prayer, the rhombus of prayer, the rhombuses of prayer, the rhombus of prayer, The trapezoid of prayer. The trapezoids of prayer. The trapezoid of prayer. The polygon of prayer. The polygons of prayer. The polygon of prayer. The pentagon of prayer. The pentagons of prayer. The pentagon of prayer. The hexagon of prayer. The hexagons of prayer. The hexagon of prayer. The septagon of prayer. The septagons of prayer. The septagon of prayer. The octagon of prayer. The octagons of prayer. The octagon of prayer. The nonagon of prayer. The nonagons of prayer. The nonagon of prayer. The decagon of prayer. The decagons of prayer. The decagon of prayer. The evolution of prayer. The evolutions of prayer. The evolution of prayer. The revolution of prayer. The revolutions of prayer. The revolution of prayer. The elemental art of prayer. The elemental arts of prayer. The elemental art of prayer. The elemental science of prayer. The elemental sciences of prayer. The elemental science of prayer. The elemental principle of prayer. The elemental principles of prayer. The elemental principle of prayer. The elemental technology of prayer. The elemental technologies of prayer. The elemental technology of prayer. The low elemental art of prayer. The low elemental arts of prayer. The low elemental art of prayer. The low elemental science of prayer. The low elemental sciences of prayer. The low elemental science of prayer. The low elemental principle of prayer. The low elemental principles of prayer. The low elemental principle of prayer. The low elemental technology of prayer. The low elemental technologies of prayer. The low elemental technology of prayer. The high elemental art of prayer. The high elemental arts of prayer. The high elemental art of prayer. The high elemental science of prayer. The high elemental sciences of prayer. The high elemental science of prayer. The high elemental principle of prayer. The high elemental principles of prayer. The high elemental principle of prayer. The high elemental technology of prayer. The high elemental technologies of prayer. The high elemental technology of prayer. The agent of prayer. The agents of prayer. The agent of prayer. The agency of prayer. The agencies of prayer. The agency of prayer. The amplifier of prayer. The amplifiers of prayer. The amplifier of prayer. The amplification of prayer. The amplifications of prayer. The amplification of prayer. The enhancer of prayer. The enhancers of prayer. The enhancer of prayer. The enhancement of prayer. The enhancements of prayer. The enhancement of prayer. The magnifier of prayer. The magnifiers of prayer. The magnifier of prayer. The magnification of prayer. The magnifications of prayer. The magnification of prayer. The influencer of prayer. The influencers of prayer. The influencer of prayer. The influence of prayer. The influences of prayer. The influence of prayer. The emanator of prayer. The emanators of prayer. The emanator of prayer. The emanation of prayer. The emanations of prayer. The emanation of prayer. The converger of prayer. The convergers of prayer. The converger of prayer. The convergence of prayer. The convergences of prayer. The convergence of prayer. The aura of prayer. The auras of prayer. The aura of prayer. The impression of prayer. The impressions of prayer. The impression of prayer. The intelligence of prayer. The intelligences of prayer. The intelligence of prayer. The sophistication of prayer. The sophistications of prayer. The sophistication of prayer. The genius of prayer. The geniuses of prayer. The genius of prayer. The polymath of prayer. The polymaths of prayer. The polymath of prayer. The psychic of prayer. The psychics of prayer. The psychic of prayer. The knowledge of prayer. The knowledges of prayer. The knowledge of prayer. The understanding of prayer. The understandings of prayer. The understanding of prayer. The wisdom of prayer. The wisdoms of prayer. The wisdom of prayer. The secret of prayer. The secrets of prayer. the secret of prayer, the mystery of prayer, the mysteries of prayer, the mystery of prayer, the revelation of prayer, the revelations of prayer, the revelation of prayer, the tactic of prayer, the tactics of prayer, the tactic of prayer, the strategy of prayer, the strategies of prayer, the strategy of prayer, the strength of prayer, the strengths of prayer, the strength of prayer, the might of prayer, the might of prayer, the might of prayer, the power of prayer, the powers of prayer, the power of prayer, the authority of prayer, the authorities of prayer, the authority of prayer, the dominion of prayer, the dominions of prayer, the dominion of prayer, the rhythm of prayer, the rhythms of prayer, the rhythm of prayer, the melody of prayer, the melodies of prayer, the melody of prayer, the music of prayer, the musics of prayer, the music of prayer, the lyric of prayer, the lyrics of prayer, the lyric of prayer, the song of prayer, the songs of prayer, the song of prayer, the dance of prayer, the dances of prayer, the dance of prayer, the spirit of prayer, the spirits of prayer, the spirit of prayer, the soul of prayer, the souls of prayer, the soul of prayer, the body of prayer, the bodies of prayer, the body of prayer, the mark of prayer, the marks of prayer, the mark of prayer, the promise of prayer, the promises of prayer, the promise of prayer, the visionary of prayer, the visionaries of prayer, the visionary of prayer, the vision of prayer, the visions of prayer, the vision of prayer, the picture of prayer, the pictures of prayer, the picture of prayer, the sound of prayer, the sounds of prayer, the sound of prayer, the tongue of prayer, the tongues of prayer, the tongue of prayer, the language of prayer, the languages of prayer, the language of prayer, the communication of prayer, the communications of prayer, the communication of prayer, the people of prayer, the peoples of prayer, the people of prayer, the society of prayer, the societies of prayer, the society of prayer, the fortress of prayer, the fortresses of prayer, the fortress of prayer, the government of prayer, the governments of prayer, the government of prayer, the city of prayer, the cities of prayer, the city of prayer, the nation of prayer, the nations of prayer, the nation of prayer, the civilization of prayer, the civilizations of prayer, the civilization of prayer, the world of prayer, the worlds of prayer, the world of prayer,